Hi everyone, this is Rupert Morrison and Shradha. We're excited to launch our first ever podcast together. I'm going to we'll introduce ourselves and give you a bit of background why we're doing this podcast and why we think it's important. And then we're going to talk about OP&A and the OP&A function. And our promise to you is at the end, you will have 2 practical takeaways. That's our promise.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue. See tomorrow's business today.
So my name is Rupert Morrison. For my sins, I'm a reform management consultant. I was a management consultant for a large number of time, as was Shradha. So that's what we have in common, as well as a deep passion for org design and organizational transformation. I'm an economist by education, and after being a management consultant, I I'm a founder of a tech firm, a technology called Orgvue, and I've written a couple of books. One is called Data-Driven Organization Design, and the other is called Organizational Planning and Analysis. So I've committed myself with many years and early mornings and late nights, working, thinking, and trying to transform how people think about their organizations. And I'm here with Shradha to help, because I think bringing in the pragmatist is going to be extremely helpful. So Shradha, why don't you introduce yourself first, and then we'll start riffing.
Thank you so much, Rupert. This is terrific. So my name is Shradha Prakash, and as Rupert mentioned, I have been management consultant, as well as internal consultant and practitioner for different organizations. I started my career back in India in Infosys, and then worked at Boston Consulting Group, and now I am at Prudential. So I'm really passionate about this topic of organization design, talent transformation. I've worked in these topics for more than a decade and a half. But this is not just a job for me. This is really a passion area. And I want to make this more tangible for the organizations, because I feel that this part, the OP&A that we're talking about, is still not mainstream in our organizations. It's not like compensation or talent acquisition when we think about HR function. And so this is what brought us together to do this podcast and make it more tangible, more practitioner oriented, and to bring theoretical aspects of this thinking into a very practical way. So, Rupert, let me start by asking this. We have spoken about OP&A a couple of times right now. Let's start with that. What is actually OP&A and why is it important?
So it's an acronym, and the acronym stands for Organizational Planning and Analysis. And I was doing a lot of org design work and workforce planning work, and I was interviewing a bunch of CFOs to be CFOs in the organization that I was the CEO of. And I asked them all, so how do you organize, how do you see the organization of the finance function? And every single one of them basically answered in the same way. It was, well, you've got financial control, financial operations, credit control, and that's critical. And we needed that to be operationally efficient, and we need to get our accounts done on time, et cetera, and manage cash, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's this other function, financial planning and analysis. And it's different people, and that's more around the budgeting and the planning and pulling the levers like price, et cetera. And I'd heard of FP&A before, but I hadn't really sunk into my head that there was such a big distinction and the difference in the people and the nature and the forward-looking nature of FP&A. And so I was thinking about all the work that I was doing in org design and workforce planning. I was like, hang on a second, it's the same in HR. In HR, you have the operational backward-looking functions, which are absolutely crucial. And Shradha, you mentioned a few of them. If you don't sort payroll, you're in deep trouble. If you don't manage the life cycle of the employees through talent acquisition, the onboarding process, the mover lever processes, et cetera, you don't have a business. Just like in finance, if you don't have financial operations and financial control, you don't have a business. But the key thing is also then to think about the forward-looking. And the world is in constant disruption. There's nothing new there. And it's constantly evolving. And in the past, people went to people like you and I back in the day when you were at BCG and I was at Carney and say, well, let's bring in the management consultants to help us and let's design an organization or the workforce plan. And then you have your RASs and your 2B and it's one and done. You've defined it. It's all the beautiful PowerPoint slides are there, the hundreds and thousands of them. And then it's over. And then you go on with your life. And the world's not like that anymore. The world, you need to be adapting. It's a constant on. And so with that, you no longer can just outsource this. It's got to be internal. And the other thing is it's really a discipline, just like FP&A is a discipline, because it requires systems thinking. These are connected. So the org design isn't just about the structure and who reports to who. It's about the work. And Peter Drucker said this a long, long time ago. Think about the work and then the workforce. So to me, the OP&A is a function very similar to finance, FP&A, Twin, similar acronyms. And in my view, and I know in your view, Shradha, it is a central function.
Love it. Love the way you have articulated the way that needs to be structured, the deliverables that this function needs to offer. I think you had a couple of really good nuggets in there. One I feel is forward looking and forward looking with dynamism. Because otherwise, in the past, what I have done when I started my career in this topic was that we would, just as you said, we will bring the management consultants, we will create a structure, and then we will police that structure and do not want to change that. But that's not how it should be working. What we need to think about is that how do we continue to evolve that structure so that it is leading to the business results, it's helping our business drive the impacts, and so on. The other part you talked about was systems thinking. And that is, again, extremely important, is because we don't think these things as silo. It's not about just who reports into who, but how does that report, how that leads into better ways of working and understanding of what is important work, where we need to invest in, where we need to build long-term capabilities in the organization. So all these great stuff, and I get more excited to talk about it. And I think that is what the podcast is about, that how do we bring to life first these aspects, that what is important, like what exactly is important, how do we think about these differently, but tee it up with how do we make it more simple, more scalable, more stickable into the organization so that people have some real practical takeaways that they can go back and implement it in the next hour, right? So Rupert, I know that you have written 2 books and I have really read them end to end. I love them. But what led to the thinking of those books? Like, what was that light bulb moment when you said that I really need to write it down?
It was me expressing all these ideas. I was actually in Manhattan, believe it or not, chatting to someone who was an investor. And I was explaining all the ideas. And he's like, wow, why didn't you write a book about it? And that was in 2010. So that was, 13 years ago. And so I said off the cuff, I will then. And so it took me 5 years from me saying, yes, I will, to actually getting the first edition of Data-Driven Organization Design done. And it wasn't one big light bulb moment. I started writing blogs. I'd already developed a lot of training. And obviously I was helping a lot of clients with this and had already helped a lot of clients do this work. And there were certain buzz moments. So we can't go into too much detail now, but one was, so how do you define accountability? And the famous RACI model, which is responsible and accountable, consult, and inform. And I wrote a blog post saying, well, that's just overly complicated. And no one knows the difference between responsible and accountable anyway. And no one looks at a no one looks at a RACI model and says, "Well, do I need to be informed or consulted here?" It just doesn't happen in the real world. So I said, well, why don't we just really focus on who's this responsible? Now, if it's decisions, let's also be clear about who needs to approve those decisions, so who's got veto power. But actually, what I'm really interested in is who does the work. And so that's the do, that's D. So I've changed so that was an example. I wrote that podcast, I created that, I got huge reaction. There were other things, podcast, blog, back in the days when we wrote blogs and didn't do podcasts. Then another one, spans of control. And, so all of these different topics. But I really wanted to create an overarching framework for it. So in DDOD, which is Data-Driven Organization Design, it's really the macro, the operating model, and then what was missing in my mind was the micro, the detailed design. And so bringing that to life and bringing the systems thinking to life, so how it all connects, the work, the competencies, the outcomes you want to achieve. And then the making it real, which is the execution and the implementation, the change management, and the tracking and the monitoring. And what I realize is that org design morphs into workforce planning. So they're seen as two different disciplines, and I really see them as two very related disciplines. Org design is like I'm taking two photographs, a photograph of the as is and a photograph of the to be. Whereas workforce planning is it's like a film. There's multiple different snapshots, and actually it just blurs together into a movie. But the data that's required for org design is the same kind of data that's needed for workforce planning. I need to right-size my org. Well, right-sizing the org dynamically over and over again, that's creating the demand model for that. So that, it was just all these questions and speaking to people, one of the things that hit me the most is that at the end of the day, it's people. And when you're doing org design, it's sometimes easy to be abstracted away from the human being, which is why in the second edition, I actually spend a lot of time talking about the horror stories. And I think in this podcast, I think we should dwell on some of the horror stories, the pain that can be caused by doing this and not thinking through the human consequence. So that's also something that I think, we need to elaborate more and more on. And the pendulum swinging all the time, and people saying, "What's this changing?" The Titanic is a metaphor that's used a lot, and just rearranging chairs. Well, actually, rearranging chairs that impacts people's lives. So we owe it to our people, and those are not just employees; those are contractors, those are suppliers. We owe it to the wider ecosystem of the people doing the work to think this through properly, so that we avoid, the human cost of making mistakes and not thinking it through effectively.
Absolutely. And in addition of that, I think the human cost is also when we are keeping the people inside and not thinking about their ecosystem properly. And sometimes the things that they end up doing and we falsely attribute it to human error or human low performance, but basically they're just fighting the ecosystem and the not so great performing ecosystem itself. So I think that is equally important, that when we have people within, how do we make their lives better? How do we actually give them the work that is meaningful and give them the sense of purpose through the work that they're doing, which is powerful, which is not mundane, which is more visionary and building long-term capabilities for the organization. So we do have like a lot of things to talk about in the next several times that we are going to meet here. I think we have been talking about takeaways. And do you think that we are as a good point to talk about the two takeaways from this conversation that we have?
I'll give one, and I think you should have the last word with the last one. So my first takeaway is for people to understand there is a function called organizational planning and analysis. It is joined at the hip with FP&A. It is joined with finance. It is also joined at the hip with operational HR. How do you do talent planning? How do you do recruitment? How do you do pay and reward without actually understanding all these structural components that are in OP&A? And so it's as important for that, and we will talk about that in a lot more detail. But the big takeaway is there is a function called OP&A. This should not be a group of internal consultants. It's similar to FP&A. FP&A is not a group of internal consultants. They are crucial. If the management team are asking about the financial plan, the objectives, how we pull levers, FP&A is there helping the management team, helping the CEO and the board think through these issues. And the OP&A has the same responsibility, the same duty of care to the entire organization, to the executive, but also to the employees and all the people to be effective at doing this because it's so important. That's my big takeaway. Shradha, yours?
So, my takeaway is more practical. I think I would just ask whoever is listening to this podcast to go find your friend in FP&A function and find that one person who can give you a very good idea or insight into how does the FP&A function works and what are their pain points. And I'm 100% sure you'll find few topics to connect on, because when I talk to my FP&A counterparts, they're like, my goodness, we really don't know how to count position, because the HR is only counting head count, and we are not no way to reconcile that, and that's a gaping hole. And that gives you an insight to think about that. Oh, that is a different way of thinking. And it's important because there's a different way of thinking about the budgets and thinking about our finances. And that is extremely important for business and to drive business outcomes. So I think that is my takeaway, is that go and find a colleague, a friend in FP&A function and understand what are they doing and how is that affecting the human resource and human aspect of the business. Great.
Shradha, this has been a total pleasure. Thank you. And I look forward to people's feedback and thoughts and getting the next one out.
Absolutely. I think this is fantastic. And Rupert, you energize me every time that we speak together. So I feel that people feel the energy as well. And we will bring back more and more such discussions for them.
Thank you so much.